If you've spent any time in Neovim, buffers, windows and tabs have probably confused you at some point. This is the first of two videos where we make them actually concrete. Before diving into buffers, here's the full picture of how all three relate to each other. Tabs contain windows, windows point to buffers, and buffers are completely global on their own pool. They don't belong to any tab or window actually. We'll cover windows and tabs in the next video. Today we're starting at the foundation, buffers, because everything else builds on this. So let's start with buffers. I have three files that I'm gonna use them to walk through, like buffers, windows, tabs, in this video. And so let's just open Neovim. What are exactly buffers? In a simple way, they're just basically files, right? That are loaded into your Neovim session along with their content. Now, one thing, let me just open the docs. So like here, it just provides a summary. It could be abstract now, but hopefully by the end of the video, you get a better understanding of what exactly each means. So when you load a buffer, you have you can view them using the ls command. So here you would see that you have three buffers. They are exactly the files that I started Neovim and told Neovim that I'm going to basically work with these files inside this session. So the first column is their IDs or numbers, which are unique to each file within the same session, right? They could differ between like two separate Neovim sessions. And the second column has some symbols that indicate, for example, their state or whether they are the current buffer that is being edited, such as the percentage sign. So whenever you see a percentage sign, you would know that this buffer is the one that was that is currently being edited. In other words, the cursor is in this buffer. And this column would also indicate the line number where the cursor is. So speaking of the states, okay, I'll just walk through this table, which displays the different states in a good way. You have the active state, which basically means it's loaded and it's also being displayed in some window. So a window in this case would be, this split, this vertical split here. This is another window that is basically loading the documentation buffer, right? And the symbol uses A, obviously. Hidden is the same as active, it's just not being displayed. And inactive is not loaded and it's also not being displayed for obvious reasons. So when we look at these two other files, they are in fact inactive. So what does this mean? This means that Neovim has not actually loaded the file contents into the RAM. It's kind of basically just for bookkeeping, so it would know that you have also file 2 and file 3 that you probably will use in this editing session. Why? Because when you started Vim, you indicated the files that you want to edit. Now let's try and show a hidden buffer and see how that works. And this is a good place to show a couple of commands. So if you do bnext, this basically stands for buffer next, which moves to the next buffer. And in this case, it will be file 2. There's also a bprev or bprevious actually, which means that you would go to the previous buffer obviously. So I'll do bnext and you could see now that the file loaded is file 2, and as a matter of fact, if we do ls here, you could see the active buffer is now file 2. File 1 is now hidden, so it is still loaded, it's not unloaded from the RAM. It's still there, but now it's hidden. And a new symbol that we can see is this hash sign, which means buffer number 1 is the alternate buffer. And where is this useful? This is basically good for doing control caret, and you just switch to the alternate buffer. And it's like basically a quick way to go back to the previous buffer that you were editing. So if I do control caret again, it will now go back to file 2 because file 2 was the alternate buffer afterwards. So let me do ls again. File 3 is still not loaded, it's still inactive because we have not touched it at all. So another way to jump into another buffer is actually doing like b and then the buffer number, or even the file name. So if I do this, we now have file 3 as the current like active and also the buffer that the cursor exists in. So we can confirm this through the ls command. As a quick note, doing e and then the hash sign will also switch to the alternate buffer, and this will just go back to file 2. This is like a a command line way to do it instead of using a key binding if you just wanted to know in case. And so we went through these 3 states. These are like the main states that buffer has. I want to also talk about another like set of states, which is basically whether a buffer is listed or not. And note that when I do ls, right, we only have 3 buffers, but you might be wondering, what about this buffer here, right? This documentation, this Windows text file. Where is that? Why is it not in the list of buffers even though we are seeing it? And that's because this buffer on the right window is actually not listed, or it's an unlisted buffer. And the thing here is to know that if you do ls with an exclamation mark, you could actually see a more complete list of all the buffers, even those that are unlisted. And here you could confirm that buffer number 5 is in fact the current documentation buffer in the right window, and it's also active because we can see it in the right window. And this minus sign over here is actually indicating that this is a non-modifiable, it's like a read-only buffer as well. And one last thing is this U symbol, which obviously means that it's an unlisted buffer. Now what is the point of unlisted buffer? It usually means that like it's something that's internally being used, or like a plugin maybe uses it, and it's basically not so relevant to your editing session for like the actual editing process. This is what it means. And we can confirm, for example, whether buffer number 4 like buffer number 6 is used for what purpose, and a good way to do that is using the command line again. So I'll do lua vim API nvim. There is a get buffer option, I believe. Nvim, oh no, buff. Yeah, this one. So in the first argument, I'll put number 5, actually number 4, and file type. And this way we can see that the file type is actually a blink completion menu. It's basically this completion menu when I'm typing, right? And it's like a buffer on its own, and it's being used for the blink plugin. And we can see, oh, not this one, but yeah, so we can see buffer number 4 is actually used internally for some plugin, right? One final thing is also just to point out, there is a plus symbol, and this basically means that this file has been edited but it's not written, or in other words, it's not saved. You'll also see that the line number is changed to line 3, so that's where the cursor is. And one final point is, like, just to make things more concrete and just like show you how things work internally, is like when you do b delete, this is a command for basically deleting a buffer, right? And it has an interesting way of working. I need to actually write it first and do b delete again. So we see that buffer number 2, or the buffer for file number 2, is now deleted, and you could confirm this here where none of these, like file number 2 is no longer present, right? Let me just jump into buffer number 1, right? And the point I want to make, and what's interesting, is that if you do ls with an exclamation mark, you would actually find file number 2 in the buffer list. So what deletion does is that it removes it, and it also unloads it from the memory, but in terms of like the buffer list that you have, it's not completely removed. So you still have the ID assigned and the path. The only difference is like it's now unlisted. Now, a question might arise like, why wouldn't it just like also remove it from the list? And this could be, I guess there could be a couple of reasons for it, but I think it's just basically to keep it there for bookkeeping purposes again, and so that you could like go back to it if you wanted to very easily. Like, if I do control caret, it will go back to the document list because that was the previous buffer. But let me like show it with a buffer number 1, right? If I do b-delete for this, we move on to file number 3. However, if I do E# or the hash sign, which is going back to the alternate buffer, we would actually go back to file number 1. So what happens here, even though we deleted file number 1 or buffer number 1, by using the alternate sign, you would load, or Neovim would load back your deleted buffer. And this is where probably it's being unlisted, like this buffer being unlisted, rather than just being completely wiped out, would become handy, right? Maybe you accidentally get rid of some buffer, but you realize I need to go back, and there's one way to do it. Another point I would make is that something being unlisted or listed in the buffers has nothing to do with whether it's loaded or not. And a good example is comparing file number 2 with like the scratch buffer or even the Windows text file. What I'm trying to say is that in this case, file number 2 is unlisted, but it's also like its content is not in the memory. The only thing Neovim knows about this file is the ID and the path and perhaps the last line that it was in, like the cursor was in. But in the case for Windows, for example, it's actually still loaded inside the memory. And a good way to confirm this and like make my point more concrete is to use again the API. So if I do, for example, vim API buff is loaded, I believe, yes. So file number 2 is deleted and is unloaded, and this would be confirmed with the false return value from that API command. So basically confirms that it's not in the memory. But if I do, let me just bring up this again. If I do the same thing for buffer number 5, we'll get a different result, not surprisingly. So it returns true. So this would basically confirm what I'm trying to say, right? Like the two states of like whether it's listed or unlisted is like exclusive or mutually exclusive with whether they are like deleted or not. Now, if you're wondering, is there any way to just completely delete one file? Right. Like, let me go to buffer number 3 actually. So let's say I do want to get like rid of file number 3 and just like also get like rid of its buffer ID and like make Neovim forget everything about it. There is this command called bwipe. And if I do this and now load the list, you would see that file number 3 is no longer existing in this list, and we no longer have a buffer named or given a number, buffer number 3. And you can again confirm this with trying to use the alternate like a key binding, like control caret, and here it says no alternate file, and that's because it's completely deleted, right? And these are like very like neat differences between how buffers work and like they're loaded or not, whether they're like wiped out, unlisted, listed. And through these examples I try to explain to you and demonstrate how things work with buffers inside Neovim. Hopefully by the end of this video you've got a better understanding of how buffers work internally and what Neovim expects. In the next video we'll build on this and cover windows and tabs.